Behind the Crime Scene with Gina Osborne and Tracy Miller. It's December 2nd, 2015. 28-year-old Syed Farook and his wife, 29-year-old Tashfeen Malik, drop off their 6-month-old daughter with grandma while they carried out one of the deadliest mass shootings in America. Born in Chicago, Farook worked as an environmental health specialist at the San Bernardino County Health Department. He met Malik through an online dating service. Their first face-to-face meeting was in Saudi Arabia, where Malik had moved from her native Pakistan. Farook and Malik had spoken to each other about jihad and martyrdom before their engagement. Farook's intention to carry out a domestic terror attack dates back to at least 2011, when he began plotting attacks alongside his friend and neighbor. The pair had planned, trained, and purchased equipment, including firearms, and plotted to target the Riverside Community College and commuters on the busy 91 freeway in a sniper-style attack. When 3 men unaffiliated with Farook were arrested on terror-related charges in nearby Chino, California, Farook gave up that plan. Farook renewed his efforts in mid-2014 when he and Malik began planning the San Bernardino terrorist attack before Malik moved to the United States.
Welcome to Behind the Crime Scene, where we take you beyond the yellow tape into the lives of first responders, investigators, and prosecutors who work true crime. I'm Gina Osborne, retired FBI Assistant Special Agent in Charge and former Army Counterintelligence Agent.
And I'm Tracy Miller. I've been a prosecutor for 23 years, and I've completed over 80 jury trials, prosecuting some of the most violent criminals, including those who have committed domestic violence, sexual assault, and gang crime.
On today's episode, we have a very special guest. We have Eileen Decker, who served as the United States Attorney for the Central District of California under President Barack Obama. Eileen also served for 6 years as LA's Deputy Mayor for Homeland Security and Public Safety. Eileen is the co-founder of Pacific Intelligence and Cyber, an elite investigations intelligence and cyber firm in Los Angeles. And among many notable cases Eileen has worked throughout her illustrious career, Eileen led the federal investigation and prosecution into the 2015 San Bernardino terrorist attack. At the time, this was categorized as the most lethal terrorism attack on U.S. soil since 9/11. Now let's bring Eileen in as we go behind the crime scene on the 2015 San Bernardino terrorist attack.
Welcome, Eileen. So where did this horrible tragedy begin?
So there was a training session by the individuals who worked for the county of San Bernardino in the environmental health department. They were having a training session in a conference room that day. And the conference room was decorated with Christmas decorations. As part of the training, they took a break and Farook left. But behind, he left a backpack. In that backpack was a device, an improvised explosive device that he had created that had gunpowder in it and that was connected to a detonator. And that was left behind.
At 10:58 a.m., Farook returned with Malik, dressed head to toe in black, wearing ski masks and tactical gear. They were armed with semi-automatic pistols and rifles. Outside the building, they fired 5 shots, killing 2 people. They then opened fire inside the building, entering the same conference room where the training was held. Farook and Malik moved from table to table, shooting anyone who moved or made a sound.
Still inside the business, 1365 South Waterman in building number 3. Possible active shooter. 1 suspect.
6 will be around.
Copy. 1 suspect so far, male in black clothing. He's still firing rounds. So we're 2 more units down to the south side. The shooter's supposed to be in a parking lot. No better description on that location with a machine gun for this RP.
Now we have 2 suspects, both dressed in black, and the inside of the business on the south side is what we're being told. We're being advised that 1 suspect fled in a black SUV westbound from the location. We do not know if we still have an active shooter. We supposedly have 2 down inside. We'll be making entry. We have several down in the conference, several down, several medically. We have at least 20 victims.
During the horrific attack, a bullet hit a fire sprinkler pipe, causing water to pour down into the conference room. As the room flooded, 14 people were killed and 22 others injured in this mass shooting. The duo got away, but police caught up with them about 4 hours later.
What's your exact location?
We're at San Bernardino and Shedden. San Bernardino and Shedden. See one guy down and one guy in the back of a car that we had at Bearcat. Just for the update, X-ray 2, we have the suspect vehicle stopped. We go ahead and extract it. We can stand by, wait for the Bearcat.
Copy.
Right now we have one down outside the car, one down inside the car. Or, well, we don't know. Hold on. And then from what we understand is one's on the run.
What happened next was really very startling, and it played itself out on national television as the world watched. A shootout happened on the residential streets of Redland. That's a neighborhood right by San Bernardino and was an area where the shooters actually had an apartment. And the shootout involved hundreds of officers from multiple different law enforcement agencies in the San Bernardino area who were called in to help on this manhunt to find these shooters to protect their own communities. As the events played out, a gun battle witnessed in real time by people all across this country in the middle of the day in a very quiet neighborhood. Ultimately, 2 officers were wounded. The shooters were killed. I think the officers ended up firing over 400 rounds, and there were 175 law enforcement officers in that area alone. The residents in that neighborhood at first didn't know what was happening, but also, I understand, tuned into their own television sets to watch what was happening right in front of their street. Fortunately, as I said, only 2 law enforcement officers were injured, but the shooters themselves died on the streets of Redland that day.
Eileen, the shootout occurred 4 hours after the terrorist attack took place. Farook and Malik were less than 2 miles away from the scene. Why didn't they flee?
Well, that is an extraordinarily interesting question. And of course, we can never really know since they died that day, but the evidence collected that day and in the days after tell us a lot about why they didn't flee. Because as you note, they could have driven far away. They could have been in another state by that time, and it would have been more difficult to locate them, but they didn't. They stayed in the general area of the Inland Regional Center, that area where so many lives are lost. And what the evidence showed was that they zigzagged around those areas in almost all 4 hours. In fact, we were able to collect enough evidence to show where they were for 3 hours and 42 minutes, missing only 18 minutes. And how did that get put together? From private videos that were on top of buildings, from traffic cams, from the help of the public.
Do you think they were circling around the Inland Regional Center to detonate the explosive device while law enforcement was busy responding at the scene?
That is one theory, that they were trying to get closer to the IRC in order to allow the device to detonate. That is one theory. There are portions of the 4 hours that they were just too far away to detonate the device. But there is a theory, as they were kept coming closer to the IRC, that they were trying to detonate the device. The other theory is they were trying to be seen by law enforcement to have that shootout that we think they planned for.
What was the motivation for this horrific attack?
What this indicates to me, when you put all this together, is that it was a premeditated act of terrorism. That while they had planned another event years ago that had been aborted, in the meantime, the shooters had collected ammunition, mounds of ammunition for months. They had built a detonation device that they had left in the Inland Regional Center. They had an SUV filled with ammunition, high-powered weapons. All of this suggests to me they intended to die that day. They intended to get caught. They intended to be seen by law enforcement. I think, given the nature of the shootout and the amount of the ammunition they had, that they intended to kill law enforcement officers that day. Fortunately, that did not happen.
This was an enormous international investigation, and I know how deeply involved you were because I saw you every time I was there. What did it look like at your level?
Well, as you said, it was a massive investigation. And the San Bernardino sheriff, the San Bernardino police chief, the FBI director, and I met. And we sat down in one of those trailers that are brought in by law enforcement at crime scenes. And we talked about what we had, what we knew, what we didn't know, the evidence we had, the evidence we didn't have, in what direction the case might go. And we developed a strategy, frankly, in that little trailer on how we would proceed in the days ahead. I mean, first of all, there were multiple crime scenes that needed to be handled. There was the Inland Regional Center that needed to be taken care of with great care and delicacy. I think everybody felt a great sense of sadness about the lives that were lost. I mean, the Inland Regional Center was, to many of us who work there, holy ground.
As the U.S. Attorney, the lead prosecutor for the entire district, what did it feel like for you personally to be there?
Well, I think you first absorb things on a human level, right? We're all human beings and we're trained to be prosecutors. And we're trained also sometimes to separate the personal and the professional. But I think when you see a crime scene of that nature, it's very personal in a way about the lives. And you see these human beings whose lives were taken from us far too soon. You see that they were living their lives. The victims represented every part of our society, every ethnic group, every sexual orientation, every gender. And you look at the victims and you think about how it is us. It's all of us. It's America, the people who were taken that day. You think about their families, the duty that we owe the victims and their families to do this right.
How did you keep it all together with a crime scene at this magnitude?
You have to understand your role. There's a part of you that has to separate the personal from your professional obligation. We as prosecutors go through years and years of training. You don't get to be the U.S. attorney as a new lawyer for the right reasons. It's not that you don't have legal skills, it's that you have to bring all of your experience to bear on the significant cases, right? And I do feel in many ways my, at that time, almost, 25 years of experience were brought to bear on this one case. I had experience as a prosecutor. I had seen crime scenes before. As the deputy mayor in Los Angeles, I had been to numerous crime scenes, numerous shootings. And I think all of that experience I was able to bring to bear in viewing the crime scene in this one instance, this one horrific case. And I think without that experience, without being able to put my personal feelings to the side, it would have been much more difficult. But, we're trained to do a job. And I think when you see a crime scene of this level, of this magnitude, of this severity, and of this importance to our community, you feel an overwhelming sense of you have to be at your best game at every second that you are dedicating to this case, that there's no time to take it in on a personal level, that there are many people who will be grieving. There are many people who will be in shock. There will be many people who are afraid. And it is our time to stand up and be the best that we have been trained to be and do this case right. And that is what I felt my obligation was. That was what my role is. There was no reason for me to be there other than to do this case right and to ensure everybody was on their game. Everybody who was assigned a task knew exactly what they were going to be doing, and that everybody was bringing their years of experience to bear in the best possible way on this one case.
Eileen, you spoke about victims earlier. Unless you've been a victim of a serious crime, I don't think people realize the responsibility that law enforcement has to victims and their families after an event like this takes place. Will you tell us what you saw in this case?
As you note, many people don't realize how much of a duty prosecutors have to crime victims and to keep them informed. And sometimes these are codified into law, into state law. Certainly it's codified into federal law, that victims are entitled to certain rights. And it's our obligation to ensure that they receive those rights. And the rights can be everything from getting notifications of every hearing that's taking place, so they have a right to attend. It can be, in certain instances, that they have a right to speak at hearings, such as in the sentencing hearings. And, most notably recently, we've seen on the news media those cases where there have been doctors who have violated the rights of women, and the women have bravely come forward to speak at those hearings. And that is a right of all victims. And here we knew, and we truly felt, that our obligation to the victims went far beyond what's codified in any law. So those rights extended not just to the victims who survived that day, but to the victims, their families, of those who did not survive.
You and FBI Assistant Director in Charge Dave Bowditch had regular meetings with the victims.
We brought together, of course, the sheriff, the San Bernardino police chief, myself, the district attorney, and Mr. Bowditch agreed we would meet with the victims, those who were able to come, who were in the room and had been released from the hospital, those who lost a loved one, those who had a loved one who was injured, and we had meetings with them.
When you met with the victims, did you feel the pressure, knowing they're all relying on you to get justice for the people they loved?
So no matter what pressure I felt, and I can't say I felt pressure, I felt more of an obligation, I think, to honor these people who had endured such pain. It really felt more like I had such a duty to them. And it may sound bizarre, but in many ways I felt like it was an honor and a privilege that I had to live up to a certain expectation for them, to ensure that they felt everything was being done. No one, certainly beyond all of our powers to bring anybody back, right? I mean, and of course they knew that, but also, it was our duty to tell them what we knew, what we didn't know. And what we said up front was we would always be honest with them, that no matter what, and no matter how painful or how difficult it was, we would always be honest with them about what was going on, what we knew, what we didn't know. And if we couldn't tell them, we would tell them we couldn't. If something was classified, or if we felt something would really harm the investigation if it got out, we would tell them that.
I know the FBI's victim advocates came to town. They are a really special group of people. Will you explain what their role was?
Absolutely. As I think about this, I remember being so impressed by them and thinking that probably very few people around the country know that this amazing group of people exists within the Department of Justice and within the FBI. Extraordinary people who assist victims who have experienced the unthinkable, the great tragedy in this world. I came to learn that the people who came to San Bernardino had recently been helping the victims of the Boston Marathon bombing, and that after they helped all the victims in San Bernardino, they went to the Pulse nightclub shooting to help the victims there. Extraordinary individuals who help victims, give them information about everything from how to, sadly, how to prepare for a funeral, how to deal with the media, how to get belongings back. I mean, when you think about an event like San Bernardino, the number of personal items that are left behind, everything from car keys to cars to, more intimate personal objects, returning them to victims' families can sometimes be very meaningful. And they did an extraordinary job of piecing together all the items that did not have to be held as evidence and returning them to the victim families. They even brought in a comfort dog who was, frankly, you might think that's, in a situation like this, some people might think that's even a little silly, but I'll tell you that dog was the sweetest dog I've ever met in my life. And it was so patient and brought truly great comfort to people and children and adults alike who just, needed a time with a calm dog that looked them in the eyes and somehow gave them an assurance everything was going to be all right. There were some really beautiful moments there with the victim advocates who seemed to know exactly what to do at the exact right time.
It sounds like you had a whole lot on your plate with all of your leadership responsibilities, as well as caring for the victims and their families. Did you ever take it to a personal level yourself? And if you did, what still haunts you?
I think being part of a law enforcement community, a broader law enforcement community that is very close and very tight knit, we're able to talk a lot. And I think that there's value in that. And certainly the prosecutors in my office, I should say my former office, I think once a prosecutor, you always feel connected to the office you worked in. But in my former office, we've talked about the case quite a lot. And I think being able to share our experiences together certainly help. And, and I say it also helps tremendously that I have a very strong family unit that assisted me through that. But your question, what haunts me most about the case? I think the room, I'll never forget the room. But I think when you see a room like that, you do see the worst of humanity that has unfolded. But I will also say during this time, I also saw the best of humanity. And I'd be remiss if I didn't reflect on that a bit, because so many times the greatness of humanity came forward. And it ran the gamut from we needed more space. We were in the FBI office in a very small room that was the command center. Gina probably remembers that room. Probably fit far too many people in that little room of a command center. But we really need more room. And there was a real estate office in the same building as the FBI. And they just gave us the keys to their conference room and turned it over and said, take it as long as you need. We don't need the keys back until you say you're done. And then in the days and weeks after it, and Gina, you probably remember this too, I'm not sure we had to buy 1 ounce of food during that time because the community just kept dropping food off at the FBI office to say thank you. And so, I will often reflect on, yes, you see the depravity of what humans can do, but you also saw the best of people. And I'll say another thing that I reflect on is the victims' families, how vulnerable they were, how raw their emotions were, which is, of course, understandable, and how privileged I feel to have tried to assist them in any way. And I think President Obama said it best when he visited the victims. He said, that these people have suffered greatly, but at the same time, they could not have been more inspiring. And because they were so proud of their loved ones and insistent that something good would come of this. And so while, it was certainly difficult and challenging to deal with people who are experiencing the worst thing they may ever experience in their life, I certainly also took great inspiration from these amazing people who, through it all, were extraordinary human beings. And I do feel it was a privilege that I got to witness that and to witness, frankly, the law enforcement effort that's not talked about very much other than what transpired on national television. But what I saw behind the scenes was absolutely inspiring. When you see hundreds of law enforcement officers from all around the country who were flown in to assist, some with expertise, all of whom were trained, and all of whom were given a job to do, and how they brought calm to chaos by using all of their expertise, coming together and for a common mission, and everybody working towards that common mission. In many ways, it was so awe-inspiring to see how the law enforcement community can achieve such greatness when called upon to do that. There was a part of me that wished many Americans could have witnessed that, because it was truly extraordinary in that moment in time to see all that training and experience come to bear and people working together to solve a problem and to figure out how many people were involved in this. Were we still threatened? Was there going to be a subsequent attack? Now that several years have passed, we have the answers to those questions, but when you don't know the answers and you're trying to figure it out, You're trying to determine, is our community safe? How do we tell our community, are they safe? Are we sure when we tell them they're safe? We need to be honest with people, but getting answers can take time. So many hundreds of people helped us in those days, weeks, and months after the event to answer those questions correctly. And I'll never forget that experience.
Eileen, thank you so much for being here today and for your leadership during this terrible tragedy. It's been such an honor to have you here as our guest, and we really appreciate your heartfelt account and for being the voice of the victims and their families.
Thank you. That means a lot.
The thing that impressed me the most about Eileen was how much working with the victims in that horrible crime scene impacted her. Were there some cases in your career where the victims impacted you more than others?
Going back to when I worked organized crime back in the 90s in Little Saigon, where the gangsters targeted their own community and the victims just were so fearful. I think that really impacted me, having to go every day to work in that community, knowing that the gangsters were targeting them and they're, they just felt so helpless. I remember how much that impacted me.
I feel like there was sometimes so much more pressure, especially when little kids were involved. There were times when I was doing juvenile sexual assault where the kids had to testify about these horrible incidents that occurred to them. And I felt so bad that they were reliving it on the stand. And that put so much more pressure on me as a prosecutor on decisions I made on presenting evidence so that it as much as possible wouldn't re-victimize them again. But I definitely lost lots of sleep over certain cases and certain victims because the terror that they had just telling their story.
Well, and that's one thing that people really don't think about when they think about law enforcement. That's a whole nother aspect of the job because these crimes are life-changing.
And when you go behind the crime scene and you look at what investigators and FBI agents and detectives and prosecutors have to do, somehow that pain and the trauma that the victims suffered from violent crimes, we have to convey when testifying or presenting our case to the jury. And to convey that message of that pain and the facts of the case means we have to feel it.
Oh, sure.
I think that's how you compartmentalize. That's how I compartmentalize and how we try to look for the good in the stories. And there's so much good. I think Eileen talking about what she did that day and what she went through that day, even though it still haunts her, she was definitely a hero.
And I'm sure she still maintains contact with some of those victims and keeps tabs on them, because those are the type of people that you want to see good things come to.
You do. It's the story of overcoming.
Yes.
And you want to help them get there, but they have to go through the process of what happened to them or their family. But there's so many, the stories of people overcoming is what has inspired me.
Yes.
Throughout my career, because there's so many stories of strength, even from small children testifying or elderly people testifying or anybody that's been a victim of a crime. They inspire me that I can do my life if they can overcome that,
And we'll see you next time on Behind the Crime Scene.
Behind the Crime Scene with Gina Osborne and Tracy Miller is produced and edited by Lisa Osborne. Theme music is Insomnia by retired IRS Special Agent Clarissa Balmaceda. Find us on social media through BehindTheCrimeScene.com. And don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Behind the Crime Scene with Gina Osborne and Tracy Miller wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Osborne.